Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going to be exploring the world of data clustering.
Sounds exciting.
It is. I actually did a little research beforehand, and I found some interesting stuff. We've got this marketing textbook chapter,
Okay.
and then there's this really cool case study on how Spotify uses clustering.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, and then just a couple more technical explanations of how different clustering methods actually work.
Sounds like we've got a lot to cover.
We do. But I think the main mission for this deep dive should be to figure out how clustering can be useful.
Yeah.
Not just for data scientists, but for businesses, regular people.
Yeah, for sure, because it really has moved beyond just the realm of data science.
Right, exactly. So just to start off, what exactly is clustering?
Well, at its simplest, it's grouping similar things together.
Okay, so finding patterns.
Yeah, imagine you have a giant jigsaw puzzle,
Okay.
but you don't have the picture to guide you.
Oh, that's tough.
Clustering would be sorting all the pieces into groups, maybe by shape, by color.
Okay, to make it easier to put together.
Exactly.
I like that. So where does clustering fit in with all the marketing concepts?
Right.
We always hear about segmentation, targeting, and positioning.
Right. STP.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's actually the engine behind effective STP.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because clustering helps you to find those deeper connections between your customers.
So you're not just looking at basic demographics like, oh, this person is 25 years old and lives in this zip code.
Exactly. You can go beyond that and get into their behavior and their preferences.
Okay, so give me an example.
So let's say you're a clothing retailer, right?
Okay.
Traditional segmentation might just be, oh, these are men's clothes, these are women's clothes.
Right.
But with clustering, you could find out that some people, even though they're all buying women's clothes, some people are really into sustainability.
Okay.
Some people just want whatever's trendy. And some people are just bargain hunters.
Right. Makes sense.
And then you could tailor your messages and recommendations much more effectively.
So how does this actually work, this clustering? Are there techniques and methods behind it?
There are a bunch of different approaches, and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
One common method is hierarchical clustering.
Okay.
And this one creates a dendrogram.
A dendrogram. It sounds familiar, but I don't really know what it is.
It's basically a tree-like structure that shows you how the clusters are formed.
Okay.
So think about if you were organizing your bookshelf.
Okay.
You might start by grouping all the books by genre.
Okay. Yeah.
And then within each genre, you might group them by author.
Okay.
And then within each author, you might even group them by publication date.
Okay. So it's different levels of organization.
Exactly.
So that's kind of like a dendrogram,
Right.
showing those different levels.
Exactly, yeah. And within hierarchical clustering, there are two main approaches, agglomerative and divisive.
Okay. Those sound pretty technical.
They are, but they're not that complicated.
Okay.
So agglomerative clustering starts with each data point being its own cluster,
Okay.
and then it kind of merges the closest ones together step by step.
So it's like building a puzzle from the bottom up.
Exactly, yeah. You start with all these tiny pieces, and you gradually combine them into larger and larger sections.
Okay, that makes sense. What about divisive clustering?
So divisive clustering is kind of the opposite. You start with all the data in one giant cluster,
Okay.
and then you split it up.
You break it apart.
Yeah, you break it apart into smaller and smaller clusters.
Okay.
Kind of imagine you're slicing a cake.
Right. You start with the whole cake and then you cut it up.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are the pros and cons of this hierarchical clustering?
Well, one big advantage is that you don't need to know how many clusters you want beforehand.
Oh, okay.
The dendrogram kind of helps you visualize the natural groupings in the data.
So it's like the data is telling you.
Exactly.
Interesting. But are there any downsides?
Yeah, it can be a bit slow,
Okay.
especially if you have a massive amount of data.
Makes sense, yeah.
And it can also be sensitive to outliers.
Outliers meaning?
Like those data points that are really far away from all the others.
So it can kind of throw things off.
Yeah, it can skew the results.
Okay, so maybe not the best choice for every situation.
Exactly. That's why we have other methods like k-means clustering.
Okay, K-means clustering. That's another one I've heard of.
Yeah, it's one of the most popular methods.
So what makes it so special?
Well, it's a partitioning method, which means it divides the data into a predefined number of clusters.
Okay.
And we represent that number with the letter K.
Okay, got it.
So imagine you're planning a wedding reception,
Okay,
and you need to arrange the seating.
right.
K-means would be like grouping the guests who know each other together at the same tables.
So everyone at the table has something in common.
Right. And in K-means, each cluster is represented by its centroid.
Centroid means,
It's like the average data point within that cluster.
okay, like the center point of the group.
Exactly. And the algorithm basically keeps assigning each data point to the cluster whose centroid is closest.
Okay.
And then it recalculates the centroids based on those assignments.
This is like a back and forth process.
Yeah, it's iterative. It keeps going until the clusters stabilize.
Kind of like a dance.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It's like everyone's trying to find their perfect partner on the dance floor.
Exactly, yeah. So how do you even get started with k-means? Like, where do you begin?
Well, the first step is to choose the value of k.
So how many clusters you want?
Exactly. And that can be tricky.
Oh, why is that?
Well, if you have too few clusters, you might lose some important detail.
Okay.
But if you have too many, then the clusters might not be very meaningful.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. Luckily, there are methods to help you figure out the optimal k. One popular method is called the elbow method.
Elbow method?
Yeah, it basically looks at the trade-off between the number of clusters and how tightly the data points are grouped within each cluster.
Okay, so you're trying to find that sweet spot.
Exactly.
Enough clusters to capture the details, but not so many that they become meaningless.
Right. Once you have your k value, the algorithm starts working its magic.
So how does that work?
Well, first, it randomly selects k data points as the initial centroids.
Okay, so like picking k people at random to be the center of each group.
Exactly. And then it assigns each remaining data point to the cluster whose centroid is closest.
So everyone joins the group they feel most connected to.
Right. But here's the really clever part. The algorithm doesn't stop there.
Okay.
It then recalculates the centroid of each cluster based on the average of all the data points assigned to it.
So the center of the group shifts based on who's in it.
Exactly. It's like as people gather around their designated center, the center itself moves to better reflect the characteristics of the group.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then the algorithm reassigns all the data points to their nearest centroid, which might have changed based on the new calculations.
Okay.
And this process, the assigning and recalculating, it keeps going until the clusters stabilize.
So the groups kind of evolve over time.
They do, yeah. And that's one of the great things about k-means. It can adapt and refine the clusters as it learns more about the data.
So it's not just a one and done thing.
No, it's a dynamic process.
This is really interesting. So how is k-means actually being used in the real world?
Oh, in tons of ways.
Give me an example.
Let's say you're a marketing manager for an online retailer.
Okay.
You could use k-means to segment your customers based on their buying habits.
Cool.
So you might discover that you have clusters of customers like frequent buyers,
Okay.
bargain hunters,
Right.
loyal brand advocates.
Yeah.
And then you can tailor your marketing messages to appeal to each group.
That makes a lot of sense. You're not just blasting everyone with the same email.
Exactly. You can make your campaigns much more targeted and effective.
Wow. That's really powerful. So is k-means used for anything else besides marketing?
Oh, yeah. It's used in a wide range of industries,
Like what?
like fraud detection,
Okay.
image recognition,
Wow.
even medical diagnosis.
That's incredible. So this is a very versatile tool.
It is. But like any tool, it has its limitations.
Okay. Like what?
Well, one key limitation is that you need to define the number of clusters, that k value, beforehand.
Right.
And like we talked about earlier, choosing the right k can be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
And also, k-means tends to work best when the data forms nice spherical clusters.
Spherical, like round?
Yeah, like round or blob shape.
Okay.
But if your data is more irregularly shaped, other clustering methods might be a better choice.
So it's important to choose the right tool for the job.
Exactly. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a screw.
Right. Right.
So far, we've talked about hierarchical clustering and k-means clustering. Are there any other clustering methods that we should know about?
There are, yeah. There are a few others that are worth mentioning,
Okay.
each with its own unique way of grouping data.
Cool. Tell me about one.
One is called DBSCAN.
DBSCAN.
Yeah, it stands for Density-Based Spatial Clustering of Applications with Noise.
That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah.
But what does it do?
Basically, it's really good at finding clusters of irregular shapes and ignoring outliers.
Okay.
So it works by identifying areas where the data points are densely packed together.
Okay.
And then it separates those from areas that have lower density, which might just be noise or outliers.
So it's like finding islands of data in a vast ocean.
Exactly. And it's really useful for tasks like fraud detection or finding anomalies in sensor data.
Interesting. Are there any other methods?
Yeah, another interesting one is called fuzzy C-means clustering.
Fuzzy C means what's fuzzy about it?
Well, In this method, data points can actually belong to multiple clusters.
Oh, but with varying degrees of membership.
So it's not just a yes or no, in or out kind of thing.
Right. It's more nuanced. It acknowledges that things can be a bit fuzzy.
Okay, so give me an example.
So let's say in medicine, a patient might have symptoms that could be attributed to multiple conditions.
Okay.
Fuzzy C-means would allow us to say, okay, this patient has a 70% chance of having condition A and a 30% chance of having condition B.
So it gives you more of a probability.
Exactly. It's not forcing us to put them in just one box.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got all these different clustering methods, each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
But I'm really curious to see how this stuff is applied in the real world.
Yeah.
You mentioned a Spotify case study earlier.
I did.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely.
Because I use Spotify all the time, and I'm always amazed by how well it seems to know my music tastes.
Yeah, it can be a little eerie.
It is. So how does it work?
Well, it's not magic, it's clustering.
Oh, of course.
So Spotify uses a combination of methods, including hierarchical clustering, to analyze your listening habits.
Okay.
So they look at the artists you listen to, the genres you favor, the songs you skip, even the time of day you listen.
Wow, they're really tracking everything.
They are.
So what do they do with all this data?
Well, they use it to group you with other listeners who have similar tastes.
Okay.
And these clusters are constantly being refined as you listen to more music and interact with the platform.
So it's like a continuous learning process.
Exactly. And this information is what powers features like Discover Weekly.
Oh, I love Discover Weekly.
Yeah, it's a great example of how clustering can be used to personalize the user experience.
Yeah, because it always seems to recommend songs that I've never heard before, but that I end up loving.
And that's because it's based on what other people in your cluster are listening to.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a great example of how clustering can help companies go beyond just generic recommendations
Right.
and provide truly personalized experiences.
Yeah, which keeps people coming back for more.
Exactly.
This is really fascinating. So just to recap, we've talked about hierarchical clustering.
Right.
K means clustering.
Yep.
DBS can and
Wow.
fuzzy scene.
That's right.
And we've seen how these techniques are being used in all sorts of industries.
From retail to healthcare to music streaming.
Yeah, it's amazing how versatile clustering is.
It really is. And as we continue to generate more and more data, I think the ability to make sense of it through clustering is only going to become more valuable.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here? What other insights await us as we continue to explore the world of clustering? Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll delve deeper into the applications of clustering and uncover how this powerful technology is shaping our world in ways we may not even realize.
It's really mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. Like all these algorithms are kind of like shaping our experiences without us even realizing it.
Right? And we've just scratched the surface with Spotify.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's move from music to something a little more, I don't know, tangible, like retail.
Okay, retail. Yeah.
Imagine you're walking through a department store.
Okay.
Clustering can help retailers figure out things like customer traffic patterns,
Okay.
how to optimize the store layout.
So like where to put the merchandise
Exactly.
to maximize sales.
Right. For example, they might analyze purchase data and realize, hey, people who buy athletic shoes also tend to buy workout clothes and water bottles.
Okay, yeah, that makes
So they'll put all those things near each other.
So it's convenient for the shopper.
Exactly.
You get everything you need in one spot.
Right. And clustering can go even deeper, like identifying microsegments within the customer base.
Microsegments, meaning?
Like they might find that customers who shop on weekdays have different buying habits than those who shop on weekends.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they could adjust their promotions or even staffing levels accordingly.
To cater to those specific groups.
Exactly.
So clustering is really helping retailers make smarter decisions.
It is, about everything from inventory to marketing.
It's amazing how data can reveal these patterns that we wouldn't necessarily see on our own.
Right, it's like having a secret weapon.
So what other industries are using clustering in like innovative ways?
Well, healthcare is a big one.
Healthcare. Okay.
It's being used to improve patient care, develop new treatments, even predict disease outbreaks.
Okay, now that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so let's say a hospital wants to personalize treatment plans for cancer patients.
Okay.
They can use clustering to group patients based on their medical history, their genetic profiles, how they responded to previous treatments.
So they're finding patients with similar characteristics,
Exactly. And then they can create more targeted treatment plans for each group.
which hopefully will lead to better outcomes.
Right. And clustering can also help identify patients who might be at higher risk for certain complications.
So they can intervene earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Potentially prevent more serious problems down the road.
It's like clustering is playing a role in personalized medicine.
It is. It's a big part of it.
And you mentioned predicting disease outbreaks.
Right.
That sounds kind of like sci-fi, you know?
It does, but it's becoming a reality.
So how does that work?
Well, epidemiologists can use clustering to analyze data from all sorts of sources, like hospital admissions, social media trends, even weather patterns.
Wow. So they're looking for unusual clusters of symptoms.
Exactly, or illnesses that might suggest an outbreak is starting.
And then they can take action to contain it.
Right, early detection is key.
This is incredible, like from music recommendations to healthcare.
Yeah, clustering is everywhere.
It really is. But with all this data being analyzed,
Yeah.
are there any ethical concerns we should be thinking about?
That's a great question, and it's an important one.
Yeah.
Clustering itself is a neutral tool,
Okay.
but we have to think about how the data is collected
Right.
and how the insights are used.
Yeah, for sure.
Like if a company is using clustering to target ads to certain groups of people,
Okay.
they need to make sure they're not discriminating against anyone.
Right. So it's not just about the technology. It's about using it responsibly.
Exactly. Like any powerful tool, it can be misused.
So we need to have these conversations about ethics and data.
We do. It's crucial.
So this has been a really eye-opening deep dive into clustering.
It has.
We've seen how it's used in marketing, healthcare, even to predict outbreaks.
Yeah, lots of applications.
It's clear that clustering can uncover all sorts of valuable insights.
It can.
But it's important to remember that data represents real people.
Right. It's not just numbers on a screen.
Exactly. So we need to approach data analysis with a sense of responsibility.
Absolutely. Think about the ethical implications.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first of all, clustering is a powerful tool,
Okay.
and it's only going to become more important as we generate more data.
Okay. That makes sense.
But secondly, we have to remember that data itself is neutral.
Okay.
It's how we use it that matters.
So we have a responsibility to use it wisely.
We do.
And finally, we need to keep having these conversations about data ethics.
Yeah, transparency is key.
This has been a really insightful discussion.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground.
From the technical details to the real-world applications and the ethical considerations.
Yeah, and there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. The world of data is constantly evolving.
So as we conclude this part of our deep dives,
Yeah.
we encourage you to stay curious, keep learning, and think critically about how data is shaping our world. You know, it's kind of crazy to think that clustering, like something that sounds super technical, is actually affecting our lives every day.
Yeah, behind the scenes, it's helping us deal with all this data, right?
Exactly. And as we talked about, it's not just the algorithms themselves,
Right.
it's how they're used,
And the impact they have.
right, on individuals and society.
Yeah, for sure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into clustering, what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I think the main thing is just to encourage everyone to be curious about data, you know? Don't be intimidated by the technical stuff.
Yeah.
Just ask questions, explore different perspectives, and think about how data is being used to shape your own experiences.
I love that. Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. The more you understand how data is collected and used, the better decisions you can make.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will even be inspired to learn more about data science.
Yeah, maybe even discover new ways to use clustering themselves.
That would be awesome. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the world of data, because clustering is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. There's so much more to discover.
There is. This deep dive has been amazing. We've learned so much about clustering,
It has been a good one.
from the nitty-gritty of the algorithms to the real-world applications and the ethical considerations.
It's been a journey.
It has. But it's important to remember that this is just the beginning. The world of data is constantly evolving, so we have to keep learning and adapting.
And keep asking those tough questions.
Exactly. That's what the deep dive is all about.
So until next time, stay curious.
And keep on diving deep.